Canada, by the way, imposes tariffs ranging from 250 to 300% on various dairy products from the United States. In some cases, those tariffs reach 270%. It sounds like a direct gut punch to American farmers, but what if I told you this is all part of a staged performance designed to influence public opinion? Not even a carton of milk knows it's being used as a pawn in a trade dispute that, in reality, should never have started. Stay ahead of the curve with the latest in tech. Subscribe to Data Dollar now and never miss an update on the innovations that are shaping the future of business and technology. Join our community. Donald Trump has repeatedly claimed that Canada imposes exorbitant tariffs up to 270% on US dairy products. It is true that these figures exist and are reflected in Canada's official tariff list, especially for products like butter, yogurt, and powdered milk. What almost never gets mentioned is this: those tariffs only apply when imports exceed a previously established limit, known as the tariff rate quota. In practice, that threshold is rarely reached. For 3 consecutive years, the US has exported over $1 billion in dairy products to Canada annually, without ever triggering the feared 250% tariff. Why? All exports have remained within the duty-free limit. In other words, that high tariff exists only in theory, but is almost never activated. The communication strategy is clear. Take a true fact, but strip it of its context. Trump did not lie about the tariff percentage, but conveniently omitted the essential condition for it to apply: exceeding the assigned quota. To put it simply, if Canada allows 3 buckets of milk to enter tax-free, only when trying to bring in a 4th bucket would the 250% tariff be imposed. But for years, no company has imported enough to reach that point. Yet, Trump's statements led many to believe that all American milk faced that barrier, thus distorting public perception. This raises a logical question. If no tariffs are applied, why don't companies import more US milk? The answer lies in how those duty-free quotas are allocated. Most are distributed among Canadian dairy producers, who have no incentive to import products that directly compete with what they already manufacture. Last year, for example, the import quota for yogurt and whey was 3.5 million kilograms, but only 12% was used. The remaining 88% simply went unused. It's not that Canada blocks imports, it's that businesses have no interest in using the full quota. The companies holding these quotas include major names like Saputo, Agropur, and Skota Butter, large domestic producers. And if they already operate their own yogurt production lines, they have no motivation to bring in more from the United States and compete against themselves. This is where the debate becomes thornier. Washington argues that Canada acts unfairly by allocating quotas to companies that don't need them, effectively limiting real market access. Canada, for its part, claims this strategy is perfectly valid, as it protects its agricultural system and regulates trade according to international agreements. This dispute was brought before the USMCA Dispute Resolution Panel, and the final ruling favored Canada. But there's another important technical factor. Many American dairy products contain growth hormones like RBST, which are completely banned in the Canadian dairy industry. This generates even more reluctance to import, even when the quotas allow it without tariffs. Economically, the dairy industry represents only 0.1% of the $700 billion in total trade between the two countries. However, the symbolic and political impact is enormous. Trump's focus on milk isn't just about trade. He could also be laying the groundwork for more aggressive trade policies. The result: food prices rise, car and electronics costs increase, financial markets tremble, and most worryingly, the public gets trapped in a narrative filled with outrage, without knowing the full truth. Maybe milk isn't being taxed, but trust and public clarity are paying a much higher price. Are you sure your anger is based on the whole story? In theory, raising tariffs could balance the country's finances, but in practice, what happens first is an economic downturn. Welcome to the tariff-based economic plan, Russian roulette version. Trump is preparing a new move. It's not about social media or memes, but something much more forceful: applying a global 20% tariff on all imports. A figure that shakes the markets and keeps economists up at night. This isn't the typical America First stance. It's a revival of the Smoot-Hawley policy that in the 1930s dragged the US into the Great Depression. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, summed up this plan with a devastating phrase. "There's no good scenario here, Kate, just darker versions of a dark outlook." If applied immediately, as the White House suggests, investors would be in serious trouble even before the order is signed. The Dow Jones, S&P 500, and Nasdaq indexes would plummet like cars without brakes. Zandi calculates the following. Today, the unemployment rate is around 4%. With this measure, it would exceed 7%. That would imply a significant recession, not a mild decline, but a sharp jump into crisis. In other words, if you have a job, hold on to it, and if you don't, keep the number for the unemployment office handy. The painful part is that even if softer versions were applied, country by country, the average tariff would still be around 15%, enough to push the economy to the brink. Common logic says that raising taxes generates more revenue, but Zandi explains that with a 20% tariff, the recession would arrive before the government could collect a single dollar. As tariffs rise, so do unemployment and bankruptcies. People lose income, spend less, and businesses earn less. Consequently, tax revenues fall, both individual and corporate. Meanwhile, government expenses increase, more unemployment benefits, more food assistance, more housing aid, and more farm bailouts due to trade retaliation from countries like China. Zandi summarizes it clearly. Tariff revenue is overshadowed by losses in other tax revenues, all this while social spending rises. And not only is the US on high alert, Mexico, its closest trading partner, has been sending delegations to Washington almost weekly. Former Deputy Foreign Minister Julian Ventura warns that tariffs affect not only markets but also consumer and investor confidence. The impact is real. The US-Mexico supply chain alone supports 14 million jobs in North America. If that network collapses, the blow extends far beyond factories. It hits employment, consumption, and investment across the region. Canada is not standing idle either. Ottawa activated its emergency response plan, something unseen in decades, signaling the high level of tension between the two allies. The day some called Liberation Day, when the US would free itself from trade shackles, Wall Street responded with a collapse. Investors fled, and economists agreed. This wasn't freedom, it was the return of Smoot-Hawley. The tariff policy of the 1930s helped plunge the United States into a deep recession. A fiscal move that could destroy millions of jobs. A decision that could crash Wall Street. A stance that could bring the country closer to an unprecedented recession. The key question is, are we heading towards sustainable growth, or falling into an old crisis disguised as novelty? Meanwhile, a former president returns without concern for the hardships of the people, chasing his own ideals. Former President Trump told NBC News by phone that he didn't care if his tariffs on the auto sector raised prices. Liberation Day is approaching. Trump has named April 2nd the date when America would regain money and respect. But is this truly progress for the country, or just a punch to consumers' wallets? Since 1947, the average US tariff rate was 8%. Today, it's expected to jump from under 2% to 8%, returning to post-war levels. The people will bear the cost of this crisis. The dream of American-made cars could turn into a nightmare of payments. Trump wants citizens to buy domestically produced cars. But what about prices? With higher tariffs, vehicle costs will soar. How much is the average citizen willing to pay for these increases? Prices could rise by between $2,000 and $15,000 per car. Many components and chips are imported from abroad. Tariffs not only fail to protect jobs, but also force consumers to pay more for everything. Thus, the automotive dream becomes a constant debt. And Canada wonders, what did we do wrong? Many Canadians don't understand the complaints. They signed a trade deal with the previous administration that Trump himself called the best deal ever made. Yet despite all this, Canada is now another target of new tariffs. Was it a mistake or a risky move to satisfy a desire for greatness? 90% of global trade will be affected. Experts warn that almost all global commerce will suffer consequences. How will the world respond? First, with retaliations that will create supply chain blockages and drive up costs. Inflation could explode. and American citizens would face higher prices for cars and common goods. If the dollar's value falls, the economy faces an unprecedented storm. Not only will consumers suffer, companies will be forced to cut investment and production. The result: an uncertain future for the US economy as key sectors struggle to stabilize. Chaos in strategy. Remember, Trump changes his stance frequently. Today he announces global tariffs, tomorrow he exempts certain countries, and the next day demands lower prices. This lack of consistency prevents businesses from planning, generating uncertainty. Businesses freeze, and citizens fear constant price hikes. Without stability, the economy stagnates, and investor confidence weakens. This only adds confusion and hardship for households that cannot foresee the future or make important decisions. Without a plan, there's only chaos. The question is whether this policy brings real benefits or just disorder. Car prices will rise, basic goods will become more expensive. Yet there is no clear plan to strengthen domestic industry. The population will face high prices while benefits remain unseen. The final result? Without a long-term strategy or clarity, Liberation Day will be a trap. People will pay a high price for unrealistic dreams, and the economy will face a sharp recession. Companies won't invest amidst instability, and the people will be left waiting for the next price hike. The political battle between Trump and Hollywood isn't over, but does anyone really know what's happening behind the White House doors? In 2017, Meryl Streep surprised everyone with her Golden Globe speech. Instead of thanking, she used her award to criticize Trump, especially for mocking a disabled journalist during his campaign. "You see this guy? I don't know what I said. I don't remember," Trump mimicked. And that, Streep confessed, broke her heart. It wasn't a movie, it was real life. When someone with power humiliates, it spreads. It gives permission for others to do the same. Disrespect breeds more disrespect. Violence invites more violence. When the powerful use their influence to intimidate, everyone suffers. Streep didn't mention Trump directly, but the message was clear. A dehumanizing action not only tarnishes a candidate's image, but it also spreads throughout society. This created a stark contrast to what many expected from a president. Of course, Trump responded immediately on Twitter. "Meryl Streep, one of the most overrated actresses in Hollywood." These words sparked backlash and made Trump an even bigger target. Ironically, his responses only increased public support for Streep. A typical Trump outburst where every attack earns him more criticism. The more he reacts, the more he corners himself. Parallel to the political battle, the relationship between Melania and Donald also draws curiosity. Although she is the president's wife, Melania has maintained an enigmatic silence. It was speculated they lived separately, as she did not immediately move into the White House, citing her son's need to finish the school year. "The first time was hard. We didn't have much information. Now I know where I'll go, what rooms we'll use, what furniture to bring," Melania commented. During the presidency, her involvement was discreet. She was said to avoid campaign events, and her reasons were questioned. Then came the jacket with the phrase, "I really don't care, do you?" during her visit to migrant child detention centers. At a time when the world condemned family separations, that garment caused outrage. It seemed to reflect an indifferent attitude toward a sensitive issue. It was one of the episodes that most affected her public image. While Melania promoted her anti-bullying initiative, her husband was one of the main bullies on social media. If you enjoyed the video and would like to continue learning about technology and markets, subscribe to Data Dollar and leave a like. See you next time.